thinking about moving back home, we've already helped hundreds secure citizenship, housing, relocation, driver's licenses, and business setup. Endorsed by Ghana's Office of the President, we make your move seamless. Learn more at www.r2gh.com. Your new life is waiting.
Can someone who wasn't born on the continent fully understand African spiritual sciences without learning the languages that shape those systems?
It would be very difficult. I would say both those who are born outside of the continent and those who are born on the continent. What I found, and each and every person who comes here, like we've done the Sankofa journey, sankofajourney.com for those who are looking, for 27 years. And every single person is shocked when they find out that, if you ask somebody, their Ga, right? You'll ask them to count to 10. Once they start getting past 4 and 5, because they're used to doing, their transactions in English, right? Once people's in the same thing in Akan, in, most of the languages, that these are people, this is their own language. But now once you're doing basic things like, all right, we'll count to 6, 7, 8, they don't like they start getting lost and then they switch back to the English. Same thing for colors. I remember I was at the School of Languages conference, and this is when our now Vice President, Prof. Nana Poko Ajimai, when she was Minister of Education, said that, basically that indigenous languages should be compulsory and so forth and so on. And there was like this huge firestorm. Well, how do you say electron? How do you say this? How would you even say that? And it came up and this is at University of Ghana. This is again when she was Minister of Education, and people were saying, "How many of you?" So they had a panel, and she was invited to the panel. One of the panelists said, "How do you even say brown in tree?" And here's the this is at ISA conference hall. I remember there are like a good 500 people. Most of them are native speakers of tree, or at least speak it secondarily. And they asked, well, who knows how to say the word brown? I raised my hand. Why? Because my supervisor, Prof. Osam, shout out to him, he had me read the dictionary from cover to cover. This is the 1933 edition of the Cristala Dictionary. I read it cover to cover. So like I knew that the word is dodoye. Dodoye, that's the word for brown. And you found it in expressions like mehon dodome kakra. Like my body browns me a little bit is what you're saying, but that's the way to say you're not feeling so well, such and such. But this is something that comes up. And last time, actually a time or two ago, I was on I Never Knew TV. I talked about how the English language is rewiring the brains of the native speakers of the language. So if you wanted to say something like ahuhra deme, you're saying steam takes hold of me. But because people have already gotten their mouths ready to speak English, they'll say maya hot, right? So like I am this, you are that. So now that we're thinking about I am this or you are that, now our entire way of phrasing something. And what's ironic about this is that if you look at languages in Jamaica and Suriname, the main way that they say that these are still, the languages, indigenous languages or black people that have this connection and so forth is on the syntax, right? Even if the lexicon has been, bleached out, whatever, with French or with Spanish or with English or whatever, the syntax is where you still find that they're able to say, like you have serial, all these things that are just like how the languages are here. But what you're finding now here on the continent is that even the syntax has eroded, where, just like the example I've given, the structure of the sentence would be a particular type of way if you're speaking Ga or Chi or Yoruba. But once you start thinking in English first, now your whole orientation has changed. Now coming directly to the point about, those from the diaspora, it's interesting. I was just in Burkina Faso and there was a sister who was like, oh, I'm being initiated into Dogon, something, something. But of course, she doesn't speak Dogon, clearly, right? And, they're saying, oh, the Dogon people are the exact same people of classical Kemet, but they're not the only ones. If you look at the research of Mamse Khanta Diop, Theophilo Benga, they've shown that you can find aspects of the language of classical Kemet in Akan, in Yoruba, in Wolof, that was mainly Mamse Khanta Diop's work, in, Congo, Kikongo, and languages all throughout the continent. So to say the Dogon are the only one, it misses the entire point of Kemet, because Kemet means the land of black people. So all these black people, you could find aspects of their language in Medu Neter, and then you'll find aspects of Medu Neter in all of these contemporary languages. That's one. But again, because she doesn't know, Medu Neter, and then she also doesn't know Dogon, you have these people who are, marrying, non-black people. They're marrying white, quote unquote, white people. They're initiating them and so forth. Meanwhile, if you actually read any text from Kemet, for example, the prophecy of Nefertiti, it talks about how when these non-black people come into Kemet, we drove them away. It actually, and I just presented on this on Saturday about Ameni, right? This ruler who comes up from the south and then drives them out of Kemet, right? Before that, you can find the autobiography of Weni, where he talks about, the two sides of the house come together from Medu Neter in the north to Abu in the south, that the Medjay Nahasyu, the Nahasyu are referred to as the Nubians or Cushites, depending on what term in English you want. I just use the term Nahasyu because that's the original term. But it talks about the Ka'au Nahasyu, the Irjet Nahasyu, Medjay Nahasyu, and goes through all of these black people who have all come together to drive. And again, this goes back to the original question about the symbolism of the vulture and so forth, that all of them are coming together to drive these non-blacks out of the land of black people. So imagine you're coming to learn about Kemet, and the main thing about Kemet, you've missed it because you don't know how to read anything, where Kemet is, it means the land of black people, and the main thing in Kemet is to drive them out. But in Kemet, you had those who were always very, very vigilant and cognizant of the role of maintaining Kemet as a land of black people. But at the same time, you had those who were sellouts, who were allowing them to, these non-blacks to come into Kemet. So just in the text that I mentioned, Sarah Kamos, right? So in the text of Sarah Kamos, he talks about, these Hyksos, Hakal Hasut, they've come into Kemet, right? But he asked his counselors, what should he do about it? And some are saying, we graze our cattle. They send, emmer wheat for our cattle to graze and so forth. We have our water, they have their water. So they're basically fine. The status quo. These invaders have come into the land of black people, Kemet, and they've taken over land. They've taken, over the authority and so forth. But his counselors are saying it's fine, just leave things be. If they do anything against us, then we'll do something against them then. And Sarah Kambon, he responds to them. He says, dividing the land with me is not tolerable for me. And he wages war and he drives them out of the land of black people in what we can think of as one of, if not the first war of black liberation, right? Now, look at Sarah Kamos doing that. This means that you had people in Kemet who were like Sarah Kamos, but then you also had people in Kemet who were like his counselors who were like, it's fine. The French are here. They're stealing our gold. Let's just let it be, right? That's the Blaise Compaoré type, right? In the same text, the two stela of Sarah Kamos, he talks about someone named Teti, son of Pepi. Now, here is someone who is from Kemet, a black person, ostensibly, right? But what Sarah Kamos's complaint is, he says that he will wage battle with him and he will slit open his belly because this guy, Teti, son of Pepi, he allowed these Amu, these non-black foreigners, to come into Kemet, and he made the town of Neferusi like a nest for them, right? And you can think about modern day equivalencies of those who let in AFRICOM, those who, whatever. All of these types of things, Altmanier in Congo, right? You had the Kasavubus versus the Lumumbas. So we had people who were true to it, but then you also had those who were anti-black sellouts in Kemet. So it's not enough to say, oh, I'm learning rituals from Kemet. Well, not everyone from Kemet is the one that we need to emulate. We need to be like Sarah Kamos. We need to be like Ameni. We need to be like Imahuweni, because all of them came up against, and the difference was that Sarah Kamos was the ruler. He had the power to overrule all of those sellouts who were around him. And he was very clear to point out that all of these counselors were saying, just let it be. But he himself stood on business, as they say now, and was like, I'm not going to allow this to be the case. And he says that they're going to call him Met Kemet, the protector of Kemet. Again, coming back to that vulture, like, protection of the environment, protection of the children, protection of the self. And sometimes you'll see in the iconography the vulture, like I said, with the wings around the ruler. So he himself has to be protected. And, when I was in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, his role is to protect them against the France, and not just France, but all of these other non-black enemies who are invading Burkina Faso, who are invading Mali, not only invading physically, but invading with their so-called jihadist ideologies and so forth. So not only is he protecting the society thereby protects him. So when you go in there, you can see all of these people lined up. They got guns. They're, patting down everybody. They're making sure that he is a protector and he also is protected, and those are the two sides of it. So again, if you look at learning the language, if you don't know the language, like how would you like? I'm speaking to this because I've read I've read hundreds of texts from classical Kemet in the original Medu Neter, right? Now, if you don't understand the Medu Neter, you're dependent on someone to give you a translation, and that translation may not be accurate. An example of that would be if you look at Faulkner's translation of the Coffin text. Now, anyone who reads Medu Neter, anyone who studies Medu Neter formally, they're going to come across Faulkner, who has this concise dictionary of Middle Egyptian. Now, in his translation of the Coffin text, he talks about, the chaos gods, right? He says, in the beginning, before there was any creation, anything came to be, there were these chaos gods. And then when you go and look at his, translation notes, he says, I'm calling them chaos gods because to say myriads or multitudes doesn't make any sense. But when you go to the original Medu Neter, you see that it says Hehu, which is like talking about millions or, multitudes and so forth. But because of his orientation, he's thinking about the Latin ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos. And his idea is that in the beginning, there was nothing but chaos. But then out of that chaos came the order of all of creation that we know of. So he's allowing his own biases and influence to, translate it in a particular type of way. But if you actually if you actually understood the worldview was coming from, the idea is that in the beginning there was Amen and Amenet, that's masculine and feminine hiddenness. You have Nun and Nawanet, that's masculine and feminine wetness. You had Ke and Keket, that's masculine and feminine darkness. And you have He and Hehet, that's masculine and feminine infiniteness. Now, what that's telling you is if you understand creation, then you understand procreation. And if you understand procreation, then you understand creation. It's giving you these are the qualities of the female womb, infinite possibilities. If you look at DNA, recombinant DNA, so forth and so on, there are infinite possibilities. Out of those possibilities comes you, right? In that primordial water referred to as Noon and now Net, then you had infinite possibilities. And out of those possibilities, what we see around us is what has actually come to be. It's actually a very profound thing, much more profound than the Latin ordo ab chaos. But if all you got was this English translation, in the beginning was chaos, and then you start talking about, you start slapping people around, you kick things over because it's like, yeah, chaos. And you have the entirely wrong idea. Isfet is chaos, but that's not what we're talking about in the original text. We're talking about Hehu, which is talking about millions, it's talking about multitudes. So again, what I'm talking about, I'm sure the sister who's getting initiated by quote unquote Dogon priests who are married to white people, she's not getting any of those primary texts. So she's entirely dependent on what are they going to translate to her and how are they going to translate to her. And then on top of that, you're going to have all of their proclivities, all of these vectors of compromise. They've been compromised by these non-Black people. They've been compromised by their money. They've been compromised by their ideology. If they ever said anything against these non-Black people who had come in, well, guess what? Those non-Black people aren't going to pay them to initiate them anymore. They're going to divorce them, the ones who married them. Their green card status of living in Chicago is going to be revoked. All of these quote unquote benefits that they give to you just because they know this is going to compromise you, all of those things will go away. So they're going to make sure they're going to tell you things in such a way that's going to be accommodationist to, their proclivities, just like in classical Kemet. So when we say Kemet, everyone talks about, it's great, it's glorious, and so forth. But we need to nuance it, and we need to come to the understanding that in Kemet, you had those who were true to maintaining Kemet as a land of Black people, because that's what it means. When we call ourselves Kemetiu, that means Black people. When you had Sabi Kem, when you had Henanit Kem, you had Hepi Kem, all of them, Sabi Kem is saying Sabi the Black. When you say Henanit Kem, Henanit the Black one, Hepi Kem, Hepi the Black one. And then even if you look at Coptic, the last stage of the language, you can find in the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs, it says, don't look at me because I am Black. And the word that they use is kame, right? It's the exact same word with the same lexical form and the same semantic meaning to mean black. So you can actually trace it because, Coptic being the last stage of the written language, you can actually find this. But again, if you don't have access to the text yourself, then you're, beholden to the ones who are going to translate for you. And like I mentioned with Faulkner, like I mentioned to these quote unquote, Dogon priests who are initiating white people, who now have a financial interest in making sure that anything that may offend them is, put to the side. So first, most people haven't even read the primary text, but let's say that they've read any of these texts. They're not going to tell you about the autobiography of Winnie. They're not going to tell you about the prophecy of Nefertiti. They're not going to tell you about the lamentations of Ipuwer. They're not going to tell you about the instruction of Kheti to his son Mary Kare. They're not going to tell you about, Sanhat. They're not going to tell you about all of these texts. These are text after text, and all of them are on the same topic. When these non-blacks come into Kemet, they bring death and destruction, rape and ravage, pillage and plunder. But now look at what these descendants of Kemet, and all of us are, look at what they're doing. They're doing the exact same thing that the sellouts in classical Kemet did. So I'll close on that point.
As someone who has translated the Medu Neter, do you believe it is misleading for people to teach these sciences without understanding the original language? While translating, what similarities surprise you between Black American culture and ancient Kemet?
Let me touch on the first one, and then I'll come to the second one. Um, so just as I mentioned, maybe some years ago, must have been like around 2005, 2006, there was a preeminent author, I won't say scholar, I'll say author, who, I don't even know if I would say opportunity, who I met with, right? Everyone's like, oh, you read and write Medu Neter. Like I took Medu Neter in undergrad, right? From the now current head of ASCAC, which is the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, Professor Mario Beatty, who, is there at Howard University teaching so many people in Medu Neter. That was my instructor. I got A's in the class. I still have my transcripts. I did a great job, right? So I actually studied it formally. And when I met with this author, he said that his one regret is that he had never studied the language before. He wrote an entire book that's supposed to be on this language, right? And I was just like dumbfounded, like, how can you write an entire book and you don't even know the language whatsoever? But he's gotten like throngs of followers, and he himself is leading them in a direction that he himself doesn't even know where they're going. And what often happens is because they don't actually know what pertained in classical Kemet, they start replacing things with what they do know. So because they learned, yoga from the Hindus, these Indo-Aryans, then they start saying, okay, well, let me do some Egyptian yoga, right? Because they learned, Buddhism, or they learn all these other things. And for me, I often look at it like this is the most insulting thing to our ancestors, because basically it's the equivalent of saying our ancestors have absolutely nothing worthwhile. These are Black people who are thinking they're doing, good deeds or whatever they're thinking. But basically, rather than actually learn and read what our ancestors wrote, I give an example. Imagine I send you an email. People will text you a message and it got one check. It doesn't have the two. People will get mad with you. They'll be like, why didn't you read my message? You didn't respond, Now, imagine how angry you are at somebody not reading what you wrote down for them. Now, imagine that you took, 5-ton boulder. You first chiseled it out, hewed it out from whatever quarry that you got it from, and then you transported it, let's say 20 kilometers. And then after, transporting it, now you say, all right, now we're going to have it situated in place so that it lines up with everything else. We're going to start chiseling. So first, you do the line drawings of what it's supposed to look like. You make sure everything is on a perfect grid. And now you start chiseling. Over the course of months, over the course of years, you put in all this work. And your descendants, who you're writing all these things about what to do about your enemies, what to do about yourself, who your enemy is, right? All of these types of things. Imagine we, the descendants, we don't read a single bit of it. And rather than read it, we say, well, I already know about, yoga. So I'm just going to do yoga and put, paint it red, black, and green, right? Or I'm just going to do this Buddhist, chanting, om, whatever. And I'm just going to, say it's Egyptian chanting. It's Egyptian yoga, Egyptian pizza. Let me get some Egyptian hamburgers. Let me do some Egyptian karate. Let me do some Egyptian kung fu. Like, how more insulting can you be to the ancestors? You, who are mad when somebody doesn't, how much effort did you do to like that, send that little text message? Thumb, thumb, thumb. You might have even done a voice note. All right, boom. 2 days, the person hasn't read it. You're ready to fight, right? 5,000 years, our ancestors went through all of this. Like I'm saying, the autobiography of Winnie is talking about this quote unquote Pan-African force of every kind of Black person in the vicinity coming together to drive off these Amu, these non-Black Eurasians, going through all that. chiseling it into stone, and rather than read it, Kemetic Kung Fu, right? This is what we're dealing with. And there are literally people who are doing Kemetic Kung Fu. They'll rename it, they'll give it Kiswahili names, they'll do all these types of things rather than actually learn our own combat sciences, which are there. Now, one thing, if you look at atrophy, right? Muscles can atrophy. Let's say, like, you're in a car accident, one leg, breaks, the other leg didn't break, it's still fine, but because you're not up and running, it starts to shrink, right? Paraplegics, it starts to shrink. Now, what ends up happening is that because we haven't exercised our actually duty to go and learn our own combat sciences, those things start to shrink away. And meanwhile, the kung fu that we've just given Kiswahili names to, that now rises to prominence. The, yoga, it rises to prominence. All these, I would say trying to paint something non-black, red, black, and green, all those things rise to prominence. But then I asked the question, I actually did this. We had the second Congress of African Martial Arts here, and I was one of the co-conveners for it, in our crowd a couple of years back. And we have an entire room full of practitioners of various combat sciences, as they call it, martial arts. I don't call it martial arts because, again, Mars is a Roman god of war, and it's a silly daughter who tries to teach her mother how to bear children, because how did you get here, daughter, right? But I asked all of them, I was like, how many of you have ever heard of Ongolo? How many of you have heard Ngolo, rather? And the hands aren't there. But then I asked them, how many of you heard of Kung Fu? Every hand. And then I asked them, okay, well, how many of you have ever heard of Ijakadi? Maybe like one hand goes up, a guy from Nigeria. Okay, I've heard of that. And I was like, how many of you have practiced it? The hand goes down. And I say, okay, how many of you have learned, and I just basically go through, Surma stick fighting, Dinkasi, Zulu, so forth. I go through like a good 20 of them. They've never heard of a single one. The ones who have heard of them, they've never practiced. I mentioned capoeira, kipura. Oh, a couple of hands go up. Yeah, that's Eddie Gordo from the, such and such. And I say, how many of you have practiced it? The hands go down. But then I ask them, well, how many of you heard of taekwondo? Every hand. How many have heard of karate? Every hand. Kung fu? Every hand. I just go through every non-black, Kali, Pinchak Silat. I can go through everyone. All the hands go up. And look at this. Now imagine, rather than actually learning capoeira, which I did, I started studying in 1998. Imagine, rather than actually learn our own combat sciences, I just said, well, kung fu, let me just call it, Medu Neter names, Rowan Kemet names, Kiswahili names. Well, what happens? It means that there are less people, black people, I should say, who are studying the capoeira. And because of that, now you find all these non-black people who are infiltrating into capoeira, to the point you can have a class of nothing but non-black people in Israel, in Japan. Like, it's huge in all these places. I come to Ghana. How many have heard of it? Maybe they saw Paranawe. Oh, I remember a movie from such and such. This is what we're dealing with. So, basically, I'm drawing an analogy. If you don't learn the language, if you don't learn the Medu Neter, if you don't learn to translate things for yourself, then what ends up happening is you'll start doing the substitution thing, where you elevate the combat sciences of our enemies, the languages of our enemies, the worldview of our enemies, because all of those things that they do are based on fundamental alienation, whereas the things that we do are based on fundamental interrelation, right? And I can go deeper into that. But, this is what ends up happening. And, like I said, for me, it's probably the biggest insult against our ancestors, but that's what happens every single day. And, perhaps one or two people, some people will hear what I said and they'll get mad because they're the ones who are doing the yoga. They're the ones who are, preparing Egyptian pizza. They were cutting up, the mozzarella for their Egyptian pizza. And they're like, oh man, he's talking about me. But, we really need to come back to the source, Sankofa, right? That's what this is all about. It's not just enough to say that you're doing it, but really you're painting the, non-black things that you're doing black. You actually have to go and learn it. You have to learn the capoeira. You have to learn, the ngba. You have to learn the ijakadi. You have to actually learn Medu Neter. You have to do those things, as opposed to being a cheerleader and clapping and saying it needs to be done, but you yourself are a hypocrite and you're not doing it yourself, or maybe a coward and you're not doing it yourself. Yeah, so this is back in like 1998, 1999, when I was first studying Medu Neter. Again, I was an undergrad. I went to Morehouse College. I had to do cross-registration at Morris Brown in order to take Medu Neter class, because of course, of course they weren't offering at Morehouse College. Um, I'll just leave it at that. So, my own, alma mater. I'll just leave it at that. Um, One thing that I actually asked my teacher because I'm like, I know what Black people do in places like Ghana. Like I had been to Ghana before, and Nigeria. So people will pour libation. I was like, well, in classical Kemet, if it's a Black society, a Black civilization, I would expect that they pour libations, right? And of course, that's exactly what they do. You can find the iconography where they're pouring libation, to the ruler is pouring libation, others are pouring libation. You have, carvings where it's actually a place where you make your offerings. It's shaped like Hotep, the word that people hear, nowadays. Hotep means peace. Let me do this quick sidebar. What's interesting, the people who don't want to be Black, right, or don't want to be, I don't even know what they don't want to be, they'll use Hotep as an insult. Now, Hotep means peace. And what they're trying to do is because people greet with Hotep, they're saying, I'm going to insult them by referring to them on the basis of their greeting. But even though they don't want to be quote unquote African, that's what quote unquote Africans do. When you had the Yoruba after the Imale revolt, they were taken to Brazil. They were kidnapped and taken to Brazil. And then after that, it was like, oh, they're too troublesome. We're going to send them back to the continent. So some of them ended up in what's now modern day Senegal. Others ended up in modern day Sierra Leone. Others, modern day Lagos and so forth. But what those people ended up being called were the Aku people, right? And the aku is coming from the way Yoruba people greet. They greet with eku aro, eku or song. So they just decided, I'm going to refer to those people on the basis of how they greet. So these people who don't want to be quote unquote African, and they're showing their distance by saying, I'm going to refer to all those people who want to be quote unquote African as Hoteps because they greet with Hotep. They're doing something that quote unquote continental Africans do, is I'm going to refer to those people on the basis of how they greet. That's just a little bit of irony for you. But now to come back, again, the libation you'll find, and this is what you'll find with, and I would never say Black Americans because to name yourself after Amerigo Vespucci is a tragedy. However, Black people who find themselves in the United States, that they will pour libation, right? They'll be on the block, oh, pour a little liquor out for the homies, right? This is they've never read Medu Neter. They don't know what I'm talking about. The Faulkner translation is incorrect. And that and the, Book of Vindication, like they don't know any of this, but they know that there's a continuity from classical Kemet to the shores that is now referred to as quote unquote West Africa, all the way to places like Guyana, places like Jamaica, places like Haiti, places like the US and so forth. This is a continuity. Even the discontinuities are part of a larger arc of continuity, right? So, you'll find that. And I asked my teacher as well. This is again 98, 99. I was like, well, do they have drums? And he was like, do they have drums? So he's just showing me all this iconography. And one of the main things that's problematic is that they don't show you iconography. When I say iconography, it's like murals from classical Kemet, statues, carvings, all these things. What you'll get is cartoons like Prince of Egypt or movies like Gods of Egypt. They don't want to show you photographs. Why don't they want to show you photos? The only photographs that they'll show you are like the forgery bust of Nefertiti. When I actually went to the Egyptian Museum, they have a stone carving of Nefertiti, Hamet Nesut Nefertiti, and you see her lips just as thick as this, a nose just as broad as your own, looking like any sister that you'll find in Ghana, in Nigeria. And I'm like, okay, let's even pretend like the Nefertiti bust that's made of plaster of Paris isn't a forgery. Let's pretend like it's real. Even if it was real, how come you only know that one and you don't know the one that has all the features that look exactly like everybody here on the continent? What's going on? So again, there's a concerted effort, one, to make sure that you don't see it. But, I started looking at all this iconography of, Imhab, who was a drummer from, so-called Nubia, who, he has this, huge drum on his back. And what it talks about is that what he does is he's using it like a talking drum is used, where he's encouraging his own army. And then he is, basically talking about, they talk about B-boy braggadocio. He's talking about the weakness of the other army and, bringing their spirits down while he's, bringing courage to his own, warriors who are fighting. And again, here you find Black people from what's now known as Nubia, Kush, and so forth, fighting alongside with the other people who are self-proclaimed Kemetic Black people, because we had this understanding, look, we're all Black people. We have common non-Black enemies. Let's fight them. And that's what that one is about. Khadeb was the word that's used, that when he's playing, he's killing through the drum that he's playing, he's killing the enemy, and then he's Sa'ah causing to live his own army, the army of the Kemetiu, together with the Nahasiu, all the black people who are coming together. Now, another point, I mentioned the two stela of Sarah Kamos. When you read it, I grew up in the 90s, and there was a song called Mama's Gonna Knock You Out, like the late 80s, early 90s. This is LL Cool J. And I'm gonna knock you out. So I did a presentation alongside Seba Bonochi Montgomery, Talawa Dodo. Okunni Talawa Dodo has actually been on I Never Knew TV before, called Kamo's Gonna Knock You Out. Because when you read it, the same way that he's talking about what he's gonna do in that song is the same thing that Kamos is talking about what he's gonna do to these non-black Amu who have come into the land of black people. So he says that your women aren't even gonna be able to conceive inside of their, whatever, because they'll be so afraid when they hear the shriek, the war cry of my army. My army is going to proceed in front of me like a blast of fire. Like it sounds like B-boy braggadocio. It sounds like LL Cool J on the mic talking about, I'm going to knock you out. Kamo's going to knock you out. And I feel like that text more than any other text. Well, there are other texts. There, the poetical text. You have the text of Sarah Ramasu, that's in a similar vein, where he's talking about, the Battle of Kadesh, right? For those who are interested, you can go and read it in Medu Neter, or translation. You can read the text of Jehuti Mes, who they refer to as Tutmos III, where he's talking about the battle at Megiddo, where, he can either go on this commonly traveled path, or he can go on this other path that's less commonly traveled, but it's very narrow. And his counselors are like, if you go on this narrow path, we'll all be slaughtered, we'll all be killed. We need to go on this, path, this more commonly tread path, because that's what makes sense. And Sarah Jehuti Mes is saying, if I'm the only one who's going to take this path, and it's basically like everybody would have to be in single file line. So you can imagine that if the enemy comes upon you in there, your entire army will be decimated. But he's using military strategy because he knows, we talk about Nana Hannibal and so forth. He knows that because the enemy would expect him to come in this way, no sane, logical person would choose this type of path. But that's why he chooses that path. And because of that, he's able to come around the other side. And Megiddo is where they get the word Armageddon, because he was able to defeat them so thoroughly that it's like the end of everything will look just like what he did in Megiddo, right? So you can find all of these things out. But again, these are the things that you see in the iconography. These are the things that you see, once you start actually engaging with the text, and you're never going to get it if, one, you're dependent on people who they themselves don't know Medu Neter. If they did know Medu Neter, they've already been compromised because of the money, or because of their ideology, or their politics, or whatever, or their marriage choices, the bedroom terrorism that they're engaging in. So you have all these things. Again, you have to go directly to the source. As Nana Jedi Shemsu Jehuti said, he said, we have to listen to the voice of the ancestors without these non-black interpreters. But even those who are ostensibly black, but they're like the sellouts of classical Kemet. Not everybody in Kemet was straight up. Not everybody in Kemet do we need to emulate. Some of them we need to eliminate, right? So these are some things just to keep in mind. And, just to that point in terms of similarities, I have a book that will be coming out, should be in the next month or so. The last things I have to do are the index and the cover. It's called The Construction of Black Civilization. And what it goes into is the contemporary relevance of classical Kemet to today. And, it looks at text after text, primary source text in Medu Neter. It gives the interlinear glossing, the transliteration, the translation of all of these texts to actually show you the things that are from classical Kemet that are still relevant to today. Key takeaways from each and every single text, along with literary analysis and, historical analysis and so forth, iconographical analysis. So it should, definitely be a book that people should check out. It's going to be called The Construction of Black Civilization, Volume 1. And the main crux of it is that as long as we maintain Kemet as a land of black people, that's for about the first 2,000 years, give or take, then Kemet was able to stand. As soon as we reversed that policy and we allowed non-blacks to come in, to marry in, to, come to the royal court, that's when you start to see the destruction of Kemet. And that's the reason why a lot of black people aren't there until you go to Aswan. You'll be in Cairo, you don't see any black people. Well, it's because some of us, just like in the text, it says that a nest was made for them. They were allowed to come due to apathy, due to indifference. And because of that, now they've just, opened what they call the Grand Egyptian Museum. are called the Grand Egyptian Ancestor Prison, because literally they've put all of our black ancestors in these prisons, and they're robbing the graves of our ancestors and so forth. But again, once we understand the significance of Kemet, and that Kemet means the land of black people, that's when we know that, hey, there has to be a jailbreak. We have to get our ancestors out of prison. Right now, they talk about repatriating artifacts and so forth and so on. Well, we need to repatriate ourselves back to occupied Kemet, because ever since 639 CE, these Arabs came into that land. They overran it. Many of the black, people left that land, but again, you still find them in places like Aswan and further south. But many of us refuse to be under, the Arabs, but we maintain the language, we maintain the culture, and that's the culture that you found all the way from classical Kemet, and you still find it, to this day. So the same way that they poured libations in classical Kemet, that's the same way we still do it in the U.S., even without reading any single text. Now, meanwhile, all these Arabs who are occupiers, they're still there. They can see libations being poured, but that's not their culture. Right? They can see offerings being made in the, murals and so forth. That's not their culture, but we're still doing the exact same things that we were doing at that time. We were still depicted as black in these murals. We're still exactly those exact same black people to this day. So, these are things to keep in mind. And again, if you check out the book, like I said, over 700 pages, The Construction of Black Civilization, coming out of Africa World Books. Shout out to Brother Nati. Definitely check it out, because if you're really interested in that topic, it's not enough for me to, sit down with you 3-4 minutes and, oh, now I got it. He just thought, like, no, like, seriously, we actually have to be serious. My father, Nana Abibitumi, also known as Nana Kamal Kambon, he would say black people are very serious about not being very serious. Meanwhile, quote unquote, white people are very serious about playing hardball, and that hardball is called genocide. So while we're, doing whatever it is that we're doing, they're, building ancestor prisons and then locking our ancestors there. And, we're over here and we have no idea that those are our ancestors. Those are not the ancestors of those who are there right now. I even had a colleague who was like, oh, even in Egypt, they're not studying this. Why would you study this? So I'm like, they're not studying in Egypt because that has nothing to do with it. You got somebody who's on the Egyptian football team. He's not going to study because they know this isn't their culture. They talk about, oh, they just discovered another tomb. If it's for you, you don't discover anything. You just say, oh, this is where my ancestor was buried. I already know where it is. But they're always stumbling over stuff because it has absolutely nothing to do with them. And those who would have known where to show, where these things are located, many of us have. Matter of fact, there was these tests that were done by DNA tribes that showed that the closest genetic relatives of Ramesses the third, so-called Ramesses the third, they try to do it the first, second, third, so forth. We actually did it based on different names of the different names. You have the Heru name, the Nebti name that I mentioned before, the Beek Nebu name, what they call the Golden Horse name, the, what they call the prenomen, you have the Sarah name, so forth, birth name. So all of those are there, and we would distinguish between the different rulers, not as such and such the first, such and such the second. You would have one name that's different, or perhaps two names that are different, and then based on that other name, you know which one you're talking about. So, just to that point, you would have, these rulers who are there, and, when you're actually looking at these primary source texts, you're able to see what it's all about. You're able to see what the texts are showing you. You're able to understand what is happening in classical Kemet, what you would have been able to show them, or show what's located there because we would have still been there. But again, because we left those places, because we refused to be ruled by those who, for thousands of years, we had disdain for. Imagine being ruled by someone who hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years, we built walls to keep them out. That's what's mentioned in the prophecy of Nefertiti. That's also mentioned in Sanhat, the walls of the ruler that are built to trample the sand-faring Bedouins. Who are the sand-faring Bedouins but these exact same Arabs who are there right now? Like, literally, that's what the text says, word for word. But again, if you're interested, you can check out the book Construction of Black Civilization and find out more information about it and those continuities that are still there, even despite the discontinuity of being cut off from the iconography, being cut off from the language. We're still doing those exact same things that our great grandsters used to do.
Many black visitors come to Ghana to party or what I would call cosplay African culture rather than learn and participate in it. Do you see this trend as harmful? What would a more meaningful, culturally rooted visit to Ghana look like?
So this is a good question. A couple of years ago, I did an interview with someone who some of your viewers may know, this guy Wadimaya. Apparently, he's a big YouTuber here on the continent. But it was during the year of return, and the title he gave it was "Why the Year of Return is a Fraud." Right. But in it, I said I feel like it's a good initiative that people are at least interested, in coming to the continent and spending their money. It's much better than say, oh, let me go to Greece, right? Let me go to Rome. Let me go, like, really. So there are at least levels to it. So if you're going to do conscious vacationing, and that's the most you can get out of some people, is that they'll go for a conscious vacation. At least you can come here and wear clothes that are made by Black people. Like for me, and I've spoken about this on this same channel, what I refer to the clothing that I wear as is economic warfare. So people say, oh, this looks nice. Okay, it may look nice, but it's economic warfare, because what every intelligent people do is that they support their own. They don't care necessarily what's nice so much as they care about what's their own. And I gave examples of this in terms of the head of state of, Japan, right? The Empress of Japan at that time that I did the study was driving a Toyota Century, a one-off car that was, valued at $500,000, right? If you look at the head of state of China, again, that the head of state was driving a Hongqi, a vehicle that I've never even seen, in person, right? But that's their state car. If you look at the head of Italy, they drive a car called a Lancia Thesis. If you look at the head of state of Germany, they will, drive a Benz or a BMW. The head of state of France, Citroën and Peugeot. The head of state of the UK, they're driving Bentley, Rolls Royce, whatever. Head of state of the US, they're driving Cadillac. Everybody's driving their own car except for we, right? And people would say, "Oh, the Japanese are so intelligent. Oh, the Chinese are so intelligent." Well, if you think they're intelligent, you need to emulate at least that aspect of the intelligence is they love their own and they hate their enemies thing, right? That's what I refer to as functional hatred. That's not gritting your teeth. It's saying I hate your thing. I don't want your children. I don't want to put food into the mouths of your children. I want it to go into the mouths of my own children. That's what every intelligent people on the planet Earth, that's what they all do. But those who are unintelligent, they do what we do, which is, oh wow, there's a refrigerator in this car. Oh wow, look at the features. Oh, this is shiny. Oh wow, that's oh wow. We're looking at features as opposed to where is my nephew going to work in the assembly plant? Where is my now? This is interesting. Like I mentioned before, I just came from Burkina Faso, and I got a chance to go to Itawa. Right, they have the showroom there at Ouaga 2000, also known as Ouaga 2000. And then we got a chance to actually go to where their plant is that's under construction right now. So they are building their own electric vehicles. When you go around, they have services where the same way you have Okada here, they have electric motorcycles, right? And I'm like, wow, these people are serious. Matter of fact, when I was there, I purchased Hope Horizon Industries. This is their phone. This is a Burkina Faso phone right here, right? I don't know how well you can see it. Burkina Faso. If you look at the box, it says Fabrique in Burkina Faso. And I was very excited to do that. Last time I was on the channel, I had two phones that were made in Rwanda. Now I have two phones. This is the other one. Now I have two phones that are made in Burkina Faso. Now, what are they doing? They're doing what all intelligent people do. They support their own. They practice protectionism up until the point that it can now fight on, a level playing field or even an advanced playing field against everybody else. That's what the Koreans did. I forgot to mention the head of state of Korea drives a Hyundai Equus. I've never even seen an Equus. I don't even know what that looks like. But they're all supporting their own thing, except for on the continent, we drive everything else based on how shiny it is. This is the modern day equivalent of shiny mirrors and rum and iron bars and all the dumb stuff that we were going for, beads, trade beads, from Italy and so forth. All the things that we went for before, they've just upgraded it. Now they're calling it iPhone and they're calling it this, that, and the third. So, just to that point, the cosplay is not ideal, but it's at least a level up of it's better than going to Rome to, dress like a gladiator, right? It's better than going to Greece and putting on a toga and, whatever. It's better than all of those things. Now, to come to what I think the question is actually driving at is not enough, right? Um, like for me, for example, if you want to talk about enculturation, so we just celebrated the New Year, right, at Ekrepie Mampong, we have the Ojura Festival, we have the Ohum Festival. So we have the point where Butu Adai, that's where there's a ban on noise making. You can't, if you're a traditional ruler like myself, you can't eat yam for this period. There are certain things that are supposed to be done. You're supposed to, cleanse in like a healing bath that has these herbs in it, all these different things. Now, there are even people who are like, oh, I'm the, what do they call this? Nkoswahene. Sometimes people ask me, so when they find out I'm installed, they always ask, oh, you're from the diaspora, you must be Nkoswahene. What is Nkoswahene? They call it quote unquote development chief. Now I don't like the word chief because in 1821 the British decided that they are going to call themselves king and then they're going to call everybody else paramount chief. It's the same thing as saying they have forests, we have jungles. They have houses, we have huts. They have nations, we have tribes. All these words are pejorative words that we use every day. We have a house of chieftaincy and house of chiefs and all these things. We're literally slapping ourselves in the face, degrading ourselves because it's built into the language for you to degrade yourself. There are words that they never use for themselves, right? If you're talking about the UK and so forth, they never use those terms for themselves, but they use it for you, right? But, just to, come back to the point that, as a traditional ruler, people will ask, "Oh, are you a development chief or a development ruler, so forth?" And I'm like, "No. Matter of fact, I wouldn't even want to take that role because it basically becomes you're the community ATM, right? You just give money. You don't speak the language. These people who are being installed, oftentimes, they don't speak the language. They don't know the culture, right? But it's just like, oh, if you're quote unquote in charge of development, just bring us money, and right now, imagine an assembly of all of your people come together and you can't even speak to them, right? You don't know the proverb. You don't know how to say what you want to say and convey it in a proverb. Now, meanwhile, because my house at Abibitumi, you can look it up online, is literally right beside the major shrine of Ekrepe Mampong. So as they're coming to do the rituals, they knock on the gate and say, "Oh, we've come. We want you to participate," and so forth, which is, of course, expected. Before that, they had Asafonsa, where they'll give the palm wine to the Asafohene and all the Asafoma. So these are things that when you are really enculturated and incorporated, and you actually speak the language, the culture, and so forth and so on, you sit in places where even the people who are born there don't sit. You understand? You are able to take part in rituals that even the people of the town, they're not necessarily invited to be part of, those rituals. Now, if you're, and I want to get on, I know that there are people who are actually doing great work. They're, development rulers, they're building latrines, they're building schools. So I don't want to say that that's not worth anything or valued. I'm just saying that when you're really enculturated, when it's not going to be about money, it's not going to be about the level of development that you bring, it's that you've actually incorporated into the community. You actually can speak to the people, you actually can have interactions with the people, you can actually participate in the rituals that the people have been participating in over the course of hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so these are things that I feel like are very, very important. So it's not enough to say, oh, like I put on my danshiki and now, look at me, I'm wearing my kente. And it's like, this is why and we'll talk about this as well. This is really why we started the decade of our repatriation, because in the video, the, interview I did that I mentioned with Wadamaya, I was talking about, how even this idea of year of return 400 years is not accurate, and actually won an award, dealing with the history of how enslavement extends way before 1619. There are people who don't know that, even still. After I've written articles on it, so forth and so on, I've presented on it, hundreds of thousands of people have viewed those videos. There are people who still think, oh, enslavement started at 1619. There are others who think enslavement was abolished in 1619. There are other people who think that the first ship left from Jamestown, Accra, and went to Jamestown, Virginia. You got all type of stuff that's going on, but people don't actually know what the case is. So we start a decade of our repatriation because it's not just about a cash grab. It's not about, oh, return for a week, party, and then go back. Oh, return for 2 weeks, party, and then go back. And now when you go back, what do you get? You get a knee on your neck. You get I can't breathe. You get hands up, don't shoot. You get government shutdown. You get all these trials and tribulations. And for those of us who are clearing the way, like we're doing with Repatriate to Ghana, with the presidency endorsed decade of our repatriation, we can actually make a soft landing for you where you're able to, acquire citizenship. You're able to get land, you're able to, get vehicles, all these different types of things. And in this next decade that has already been endorsed by the office of the president, we're actually just waiting for the formal announcement to be made. but the document is there. It says repatriatetoghana.com, professorobadele.com. This initiative is great. It's been endorsed by Office of the President, and shout out to KOD, Kofi Ochire. He was the first one who saw it and signed on board. He kept the paper right beside his desk. I would, come and he says, you know where your paper is? It's right here. It's at the top, right? Because he can see how valuable this is, not just valuable in terms of cash per se, right? But here's somebody who actually understands and values it. And what I said is that, when I got my citizenship was in 2016. This is before the year of return. This is under President Mahama. And a lot of people don't know that this whole citizenship thing that now Benin is doing, that now Sierra Leone is doing, that now Guinea-Bissau is doing, it actually started with President Mahama, right? There were 34 of us. We had the ceremony, and it was the first time that you had like a president doing something like a presidential mandate for a huge group of people, in that type of way, right? It's not the first time anyone's gotten citizenship. That's not what I'm saying. But in the way that has now been adopted by all these other countries, it was the first time. And that was under NDC. I don't want to go into the politics of all these different things. But of course, the next administration comes in and they want to outdo them to the point that now they do the year of return, they do citizenship, so forth and so on. Now President Mahama is back, and what he's doing is not just stay for a week or two, it's stay for, ever, right? Repatriation isn't a year of return, it's a decade of repatriation. We say year of return is kind of vague. Are you coming? Are you going? Are you going to stay? What are you going to do? It's like ambiguous, right? But when you say decade of our repatriation, this means this entire decade. We can expect, if we can look at, even for those, there are people who all they just want to hear the numbers, right? If you look at the year of return, I've heard 1.9 billion has come to Ghana's economy through year of return. Multiply that by 10. In terms of this entire decade, you have people who, because of Donald Trump or for whatever reasons, they're looking to get out of the US, they're looking to come here, whatever reasons they're looking to do so, whether it's a push factor, pushing them out of the place that they were born, or a pull factor, pulling them to the land of their ancestors and their descendants, that whatever the case may be, over this next decade, the president, the office of the president has said, we want you to come here to repatriate. We want you to come here. And what he said in his speech when we got our citizenship, he says, what I'm doing through this citizenship, I don't need any thanks. He says, what I'm doing is I'm restoring your birthright. It's an honor for me. This is him as outgoing president. And what makes it profound to me is that he's not trying to get political points for it. At that time, nobody knew that he's going to be president again, right? He's saying something from his heart. He's saying, what I'm doing, it's an honor for me to do that. And that video is online for anyone who's interested. You can look at Obadele Kambon citizenship. You'll find the video from 2016 still online. He says, it's an honor for me because I'm restoring your birthright. That's profound. That tells you he really understands what is going on beyond, 1.9 billion times 10, cha-ching, right? He actually understands it. And, this is what we're looking forward to. And again, I don't want to get into one administration. Both administrations have welcomed the diaspora home, right? It's just been done in different ways. And in this particular way, it's not welcoming you home for, party, so forth and so on. It's welcome you home permanently for you to enculturate, for you to learn the language. When I came in 1998, that was the first time under the Sankofa journey, which we still do. This is going to be the 27th annual Sankofa journey. That what we were able to do, at that time was to basically carve out a pathway where people can come. And ever since that time, we've continued to do this so that when people are coming, it's not just that you're, just coming for a brief time, that now we've opened up pathways. And on the Sankofa journey, we're doing Ghana, we're doing Burkina Faso as well. We'll go there and we'll present a huge mural to President Ibrahim Traore, 15 feet by 8 feet, if you can imagine what that looks like. And it's going to show President Ibrahim Traore surrounded by the Grandcestors, right? Those freedom fighters from throughout space and time, the entire world, not just 1619 related to the US, but Grandcestors from throughout the entire world. This is what we're going to do as part of the Sankofa journey, the Abibitumi conference coming up. So yeah, there are great initiatives. And again, decade of our repatriation, we're waiting for the formal announcement. KOD, he said it's going to happen at the Diaspora Summit, December 19th. We're counting on you, KOD. We have an award we're also going to give to President Mahama. KOD is going to be our keynote speaker at the Abibitumi conference That's happening from the 12th through the 14th. We just got a confirmation today that he's gonna, do that, so forth and so on. So just amazing things that are going on in the decade of our repatriation. You could say, look at, what the year of return did, multiply it by 10, or what I think, all of these people who are trying to escape where they are, multiply exponentially is what's going to actually happen. But the fact that the office of the president has backed it and that they're behind it, really, it's the sky is not the limit. The sky is the beginning.
Skin bleaching remains a major issue in Ghana. Do you see it as a form of self hate or more of a misguided attempt at gaining social status? What deeper psychological or historical forces keep this practice alive?
Very good. So usually you can follow a rule of thumb, which is to just follow the money trail. That when you say self-hate, it almost makes it seem like it's an individual thing, where really it is a collective, if we want to say like extended self, right? A collective hatred that is there not because we want it to be there, but because someone benefits from it. And they benefit in various areas. The easiest ways to see is how they benefit economically, because once you hate the color of your skin, and Baba Omowale Malcolm X said something like this in a speech that he gave in LA, where he said, before you ask anyone, are they teaching hate? Ask yourself, who taught you to hate the color of your skin? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose, the shape of your lips, the broadness of your nose? Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate yourself from the very top of your head to the soles of your feet? Before you ask, is anybody teaching hate? Ask yourself, who taught you to hate yourself? Now, if you ask yourself that, then it comes to, well, who produces the chemicals? Who do you have to buy those chemicals from? Who produces, this thing to make it look like fur instead of fully human hair? Who produces that? The ones who produce that are the ones who benefit economically from the self-hatred, and those are the exact same ones who created it in the first place. So you can find it, you can get to it either way, right? You can say, all right, I know someone benefits in the end. Now just follow the money trail. Then you can find out that's the one who originated it. Now, how did they originate it? They gave you an image of so-called Jesus, right? They gave you an image of Mary. They said, this is the only begotten child of the creator of everything. Don't you want to look like him? Oh, yeah, of course, right? Right? This is a disease that was not suffered by black people 1,000 years ago. This is a disease that wasn't suffered by black people 2,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. The oldest, hominin fossils you can look at, Tumai of Chad, going back, what, a good 7 million years plus. You can look at all of these things. This was not anything that black people ever were like, oh, wow, I don't look good. Let me go find the chemical to bleach my skin. Oh, so forth. So because of that, you can either trace it by, if you find out who benefits, you can find out who originates it, or you can start from this side. It's like Anansi Sim. If you find out that Kwaku Anansi wants you to do something, you can start thinking down the line, how does he benefit from this? So in the Anansi story, every child learns this here in Ghana. Kwaku Anansi will tell Ochin, right, the antelope, oh, sit down in this pot, right? And let me cover it up. And now let me tie it up because this is be a good way for you to bathe, right? Or whatever his hustle is, right? Now, after he's in the pot, guess what? He starts putting firewood underneath the pot. He lights it, and guess what? Soup is served, right? And guess what? It's antelope soup, right? Now, you can find out this guy originated a thought. He plans on benefiting from it in some way, shape, or form. So you can find it from that way, preemptively, or you can look at it retrospectively of, I see how you benefit. Most likely you're the one who originated that idea in the first place, right? So again, this is what I refer to as the self-hatred industry, which is really an extended self-hatred industry. So people aren't confused like, oh, I just randomly. And you could look at this. You can find, matter of fact, I was just in Burkina Faso. There was a sister from the north of Ghana, and she had this, I don't know, this straight whatever on her head, looked a bit like Akranti or something like that. And it's not happenstance that she just happens to wants to do that. And then I went to Benin, it's a similar thing. They got the skin bleaching ads all around. You got the, make your hair look like the fur of a dog ads all around. Make your skin look like the skin of a pig ads all around. It's not happenstance. And if you come to understand that the advertising industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, the ones who have created that idea in your head are the ones who put those ads out there in the first place. Because what? They know that if they put $10 billion into advertising this thing, they're going to get 100 billion fold back, right? They know that if they spend, 100 billion, guess what? They're going into the trillions, right? And you can literally look at how the self-hatred industry, the extended self-hatred industry, is a multi-trillion-dollar industry in terms of not just getting people to hate what they look like, but also to make them hate their own clothes, right? I think last time I was interviewing with I Never Knew TV, I was mentioning to my guy, next time I do an interview, I don't want him wearing any type of shorts or t-shirts or any of those types of things. But again, because the extended self-hatred industry isn't just what you look like, it's what I will even wear. It's what type of cars I will drive. Now, you got everybody in Ghana who knows about Kantanka in respect to Nana Kantanka, who has just passed away. We went to the 40-day. We went to greet the family at the household. Everybody in my family drives a Kantanka. I have a Kantanka. My wife just got a Kantanka. My mother has a Kantanka. My sister drives a Kantanka. But anytime people come to Ghana, like let's say people who come through Repatriate To Ghana.com, they're like, how come Ghanaians aren't driving Kantankas? And it was the same thing. So I asked my guy Amadou Madriogo, I said, this Isel, this high cell, but that's how they pronounce it, by Horizon. I was like, how many people, know about it? He said, everybody in Burkina knows about this. And I said, well, how many people actually use it? Cricket. That, yeah, people know about it, but they won't patronize it. But that's not in a vacuum. The fact that people know about black stuff, and then the main, let me put it like this, the main anti-black racists are the, people who claim to be Pan-Africanists and African-centered and so forth. So I have a platform called Abibitumi. Ask any of these Pan-Africanists, are they on Abibitumi? Or are they on these white platforms? You'll perhaps be surprised. I won't be surprised because it's not in a vacuum that they would prefer to use a white platform over a black platform. It's not in a vacuum that they would prefer to drive a non-black car over a car made by black people. It's not in a vacuum that they will want to use a non-black phone over a black phone. Even with all the specs and all whatever, they don't even care, right? The Kantanka I'm driving, it will go over things that your little whatever vehicle will suffer from, but I'll just kick it into four-wheel drive and I'll be on my way. And everybody sees it, wow, this car is so strong and so forth. Wow, that's amazing and so forth and so on. But, look at it, it's not based on logic. It's not based on quality. It's not based on anything other than all of these things that look like different things are really one thing. So he started off talking about skin. The question was talking about skin bleaching, but skin bleaching is no different from what quote unquote religion you practice, what language you choose to speak to your children. I remember I was living at Hacho, and my neighbors, the mother was Ewe, the father was Akan, and the children, I was learning my Ewe, so I said, let me practice my Ewe. So I said, Indinami. I haven't thought I was just doing, and they're like, oh, they knew that I spoke Tree to my own children, so they assumed that I must be speaking Tree. Now, their own mother tongue, their own mother's language, they were like, oh, we don't understand the Tree, or we don't understand. I'm speaking Ewe to them. They can't even, now I can say, well, maybe my Ewe is not great. Okay. But to try to let them off the hook, but I can't let them off the hook for you to not even recognize your own mother's language, not even to be able to speak it, but you can't even recognize it. There's a problem. But again, that's not in a vacuum either. The fact that in Ghana, I'm the only one who I know of that I speak. No, that's not true. I know of two other families that are like that, where they, like Ghanaians, born in Ghana, raised in Ghana, who speak to their own children in their own language. Now, there may be more than that, but whatever that number is dwarfed by those who teach their children in the morning. Good morning. People, like, they'll see my children. I've gone to 1,000 places, and I've lived in Ghana for 17 years. Never went back to the U.S., not even one time. And I have a 17-year-old, right? So we came when she was, the same year she was born, 2008, right? And every place we go, when they see my children or any other children, what is it? Is it Machin? No, it's good morning. Is it Maha? No, it's good morning. Is it Ojeko? No, it's good morning. Is it Indinami? No, it's good morning. And then when I was in Burkina, it was the same thing. So I would greet people with Niabiogo. And the people are greeting each other with bonjour, bonsoir, bon journée, bon this, bon that. I was like, it's too much bon, 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 bon. But that's what's going on. So again, that's not what's happening in Burkina Faso, and they're trying to do things to change it. We just had another announcement about indigenous languages in Ghana being mandatory and so forth and so on. But none of these things are happening in a vacuum. They look like different things, but really they're just different manifestations of one thing, which is somebody benefits from you hating yourself. And the one who benefits from it is the one who originated it. And until we stop that, line of profit from here to there, it's going to be the same thing. So for me, again, if I can't get the whole nation to do it, all right, I'll get my town to do it. If I can't get my town to do it, at least in my household, right, I can make sure that I'm doing it. And then in what I wear. So, people will say, oh, why are you dressing like this? Look at how psychotic this is. For someone to even make a big deal that a black person is wearing clothes made by black people, and they'll say, oh, that's cosplay or that's this or that. Like, what type of insanity is it? Imagine you saw a Chinese person wearing Chinese clothes. Would you comment? Imagine a British man is wearing clothes made in Britain. Would anyone comment? Imagine a quote unquote white American, whatever, is wearing a suit and tie made in the US. Would anyone comment? Imagine some East Indian, an Indo-Aryan is wearing a sari or whatever with a dot. Would anyone comment? But again, if a black person is wearing clothes made by black people, why are you doing that? Something must be wrong. If you have a name of black people, right? Because people will ask in Ghana, they'll say, oh, what's your English name? I say, I've never had an English name. And they're surprised I was born and raised in the US and I've never had an English name a day in my life. Then I come to meet Ghanaians named Harry Sawyer, right? First name and last name, but then they'll say, oh, but you can call me Yoku, or you can call, you see what I'm saying? Like, this is something that a lot of people who come here for the first, like I've been coming since 98, so it's not a surprise to me. But people who come here, they don't realize that what you're referring to as colonialism or colonization is really what's called isfet, it's chaos, but it's like enslavement here on your own soil. So when you find people who want to bleach their skin, you shouldn't be surprised. When you find that they don't want to speak their own languages, you shouldn't be surprised. To the point that so many of my colleagues, they say, oh, when I was in school, they would either put a sign around my neck when I spoke my own language, or they will put a tortoise shell around my neck to say that I'm slow, or a snail shell to say I'm slow, I'm stupid, I'm this, that, and the third. Like, this is what's happening on the continent. Why? Not because we want it to be the case, but the one who originated that is the one who profits from that being the case.
At what moment did you realize that the stress and trauma of living in America as a black man had finally begun to release from your system? And once that weight was lifted, how did that new sense of inner comfort allow you to flourish, see yourself clearly, and fully pursue your greatness?
Okay, so this is a very good question. First off, is that me myself, I didn't know that I had a lot of that stress and tension and so forth and so on until, I was probably here for like a good 5 years. And I was living in Hacho. That's where two of my five children were born, right there near Mabé Junction. And I was getting close to my house and like going towards Hacho Junction, right? The filling station. And behind me was a police car that had the sirens going and the lights were flashing and, pulled up. But behind me, I'm still, going. But, there are no tickets, there are no pulling over. Like, that doesn't even exist here. The police, they don't have any vehicles. They just like wave their arms and say, your car is under arrest if you choose to stop. But, that's its own thing. But as they came behind me, they just went around and then went along on their business, whatever they're doing. And it dawned on me, I've spoken about this before. It dawned on me that my heart didn't jump. Like this, you're talking about a physiological response that you're not controlling, right? You have the sympathetic, parasympathetic system, so forth. That literally there are chemicals, right, like cortisol that has impacts on the heart and the deterioration of it and so forth. But literally there are chemicals that are going to be released into your bloodstream for fight or flight or whatever you need to do that you don't even control, that you don't even think about. And I realized that my heart didn't jump. I was just calm and peaceful as whatever. And that's when it dawned on me like, wow, how abnormal is it for me to even note that? Like, imagine somebody in Ghana, they never have experienced, they don't even know what that feels like. I remember one time I was dropped, so I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison for two master's degrees, one in linguistics, one in African language and literature. And I remember and I trained capoeira in Chicago, capoeira Kebulan. Shout out to Valentin. Um, but yeah, I would come down to do survival training to Chicago, a couple hours. I would come to do my capoeira, other things as well. And I remember one time I was coming and I had gotten into Chicago city limits. And then lo and behold, no traffic violation, a police car pulls behind me. You can slow down, you can do whatever you do, they'll mirror you just whatever you're doing. And it's psychological warfare. Now, the practical side is they're running your plates, right? But they'll literally ride behind you for like miles, like 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles. And you're thinking, I'm about to be Philando Castile. This is, of course, before Philando Castile. You're thinking I'm about to be Oscar Grant. I'm about to be, any numbers. I'm about to be Amadou Diallo. Because again, as much as they try to on these white platforms, so-called white platforms, pit continental Africans versus diasporan Africans and blah, because it gives them views. If you see any problem, like Nana Amos Wilson says, he says, don't look at who suffers from the problem, look at who profits from that problem. So again, all of these people who have been killed, you're thinking that at any point in time, to the point where I remember my father would tell me, when the police when the police pull you over, keep your hands on the wheel in sight. Make sure that your license is readily available. You don't got to dig anywhere. You don't got to pull, because they're literally, it's like hunting. Like all of these Ku Klux Klansmen, all of these, what do they call it, neo-Nazi Aryans and so forth, all of them just sign up for the police force. Imagine this. You don't have to wear a hood. If you really wanted to kill black people and have just like a carte blanche, no pun intended, or perhaps pun intended, a white card to just kill as many black people as you wanted. And this has actually come up. There have been police officers where it was discovered, oh, this is a neo-Nazi. He infiltrated the police. You're not infiltrating. That is the police force. You're infiltrating if you're anything other than that, so forth. But, again, that's when it really dawned on me that, how abnormal it is. Of course, I was talking about the Chicago incident. They pulled me over. Everything is in order, so forth and so on. But I had another instance in Chicago where, again, everything was in order, but they decided to do, and they have a term for it. They say, we're going on a fishing trip. That's what they call it. That means that they're going to look for anything that you have in your car. And if you have something, fine. If you don't have something, they'll put it in there, to the point that they had to do a moratorium on the death penalty because of this guy called John Burge, a police officer. I think he was, higher up, inspector, whatever he was, where he was forcing confessions of black people. Now, in Ghana, people are like, oh, black people are criminals and blah, blah, blah. Because that's what they see in the movies, right? That's what they see in the videos. And again, you get a young brother from the projects who doesn't have any money. You give him $1 million, he'll say whatever. He'll shoot AKs and he'll shoot black. He'll talk about black women or nothing because they've gotten him into that position where he could do this. But this is a situation where, again, I had this situation there on this fishing trip, and then they go into the trunk. That's what they call the boot here in Ghana. And I had an unloaded weapon that was in its container that I would use for securing the survival training sites. We would actually go out, and at-risk kids, youth, we would take them out into, this place outside of Chicago where they're learning fire making. They're learning, first aid. They're learning CPR, all these great lofty goals and wonderful things that we're doing for the youth. But I come and I have this in my trunk. But the police find it in the trunk and they decide to lie and say it was underneath my seat and it's loaded. Guess what? That's now a felony, right? And I was actually in the station where they went back into the computer and changed what it was. They had the rookie cops that were 2 females, all of them non-black, and then they had the veteran cops who came on the scene next, who were both males, and they're over their shoulders. I didn't know what they were doing until the next morning, where they said they changed the charge and they're saying it's a felony. Of course, I had to fight the charge. We had to go back to the scene where we got an eyewitness, and the eyewitness came, and his testimony was so like you can't make up just genuineness, right? This is just a brother, down home brother. Of course, I saw what happened. Nobody dresses like this in the South Side of Chicago, but you. Of course, so he testifies that they did go into the trunk, the boot, that they did pull out the weapon, and then their attorney was like, the state's attorney was like, well, did they hold it up in there? It's like, what do you think this is, the Wild Wild West? No, they just put it on the hood of their car and so forth. So, of course, I got off from the charge because it was a lie in the first place. You understand? But imagine, my wife was pregnant with my oldest daughter at that time. Imagine the chemical reactions that are going through her body that are going into the baby from seeing that, from the trauma of seeing me in handcuffs, me an upstanding citizen already with 2 master's degrees. I'm teaching at, all these universities all throughout the Chicago area. And when they brought up these charges, they first dismissed them. But the state's attorney was like, no, this is part of my stats, right? And there was somebody on the day of sentencing, or the judgment rather, who was right in front of me. They said the exact same thing about him. They said he had a firearm. It was underneath his seat and it was loaded. This is code for we're going to give this guy 10 years and we're going to get another couple $100,000 because that's what the state prisons get anytime that they arrest a black person. It's in their economic interest for every black person to be a criminal, which is what they decided when they passed the 13th Amendment, because it says slavery shall not exist within these United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction except whereas the party has been duly convicted of a crime. Guess what? All these people who used to be enslaved, there's a crime wave every time it's time to pick the cotton, because they would say spitting on the ground if you're black, prison, talking too loud around white. These are literal. I'm not making this isn't hyperbole. These are literal laws, right? They'll say talking too loud around white women, prison. Right? They're saying walking on railroad tracks at night, prison. Selling produce after dark, prison. Rolling dice that they sold you, prison. Like literally. And guess what? They just picked their entire cotton crop for free. And anybody, there were quotes. I wrote an article on this as well. There are quotes where those who are in charge, like the guards, they would say, "This is better than enslavement. During enslavement, you have to take care of them even during the winter when they're not productive. With this one, you can arrest one, work him to death, and then just go arrest the next one. So you literally got a death sentence for talking too loud, quote unquote, around a white woman. You understand? So this is why on the continent, people say, oh, people in the US, they're all criminals and so forth. Now you have a couple of options with that. Some people start to imbibe that and they say, yeah, we are. And I'm going to be the best criminal, right? Like they didn't even have to go that way. Here's a young, innocent child who just wants to play around. He wants to play basketball. He wants to go swimming like any normal child. But he's constantly either bombarded with the lyrics that tell him gangster rap and blah, 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 blah. And guess what? Those who are in charge of the gangster rap industry also have investments on the privatized prison side. So you're actually making the CDs at that time that are talking about what to do, shoot people, drive by, so forth. So it's like they're profiting on both sides. They profit when they sell you the music, and then once you get arrested for doing what the music told you to do, now they're profiting because you're making the CDs for free in the prison, right? So all of that just speaks to what we're talking about here. Is that I had another situation, and I'll keep it as brief as I can because I want Kumi to have to edit too much. But I remember I was at Ibri Craft Village and I was holding my son in my arms. He was about 3 years old at that time. And at that time, you had Tamir Rice, a young child who got shot down for playing with a toy gun. And it dawned on me, I said, I don't have to worry about my son getting shot down for playing with a toy gun. And he had a toy gun, right? But like this, you don't even realize the type of oppression you're living under because you're going to this grocery store, the roads are paved, you get internet, and it's like, what's the cost of being a fish in a barrel? How much is it worth to you to be a fish in a barrel? You can have a few amenities and conveniences, but every black person in the US, male, female, every single black person in the US, even Skip Gates, who said we're in a post-racial society until they kicked in his door and arrested him, right? Everybody who's black in the entire US knows, and if they didn't know before, Trump has told them that at any time you can be shot with impunity. At any time, you can be arrested with impunity, where they will either find something on you, or if they can't find anything, they'll plant something on you. And just on a whim, you're not going to see your family for 5 years. You're not going to see your family for 10 years. You're not going to see them for 20 years. You may get arrested like the tennis court murders, like Geronimo Pratt, where you're going to be locked up. They're going to say, all right, it's going to be a life sentence. Any of those things can happen to any of us as black people. So it's when you come here, and I'll close on this analogy. When I went to Addis Ababa, this is thousands of feet above sea level. And there, like how football is big in Ghana, marathon running is big in Ethiopia, where they have billboards of Haile Gebrselassie as, this big track star, marathon runner. And they're all doing marathon running at height, right, at altitude, where the air is so thin you can barely breathe. I'm coming from sea level in Accra, and I go up there, I'm just, right? And it's hilly, so you got to walk up hills and down hills. But the people there are used to it. And not only are they used to it, they're doing marathon running for miles and miles and miles at altitude. So when they finally come down to sea level, they're like super people, right? They're literally able to outcompete everyone because they were training at the most difficult situation possible. And now they're here among mere mortals. Like they're like 2 miles in front of the next person who's, from Kenya, right? Or, and then they got the same thing in Kenya. They're running for miles and miles and so forth. So that's the situation. And the analogy is that when I came back to Ghana, when I was in this place that had so little oxygen, I came out of the airplane and I felt like I was drowning in oxygen. There was just so much air, so much oxygen that I was just like, wow, I felt like I could run 100,000 miles, right? Now I was like, this is what it's like to have grown up in places like the US and then come to Ghana, because the oppression that's, on top of you, it's like going into outer space and you're not in gravity anymore. So the oppression that you're under, that you just think is normal. You just think it's atmosphere. You just think it's the air. That when you're not in that oppressive environment is the first time that you feel like there's oxygen like surrounding me. And that's why, here I am a multi-award winning professor. In the US, I am the next person to go to prison, right? Here, I'm a traditional ruler, right? I get special allotments to go to participate in rituals and all these types of things. There, it's like one false move, we're going to shoot you in the back, right? So this is when it's really when you're outside of that environment, when you're outside of that high altitude, when you're outside of the atmosphere, that you can really see the heights that you can attain. And, to be fair, those who are born on the continent, they may feel like, oh, around here there's so much tribalism, I can't do what I want to do because of tribalism. Sometimes they get out of Nigeria and then they go, win mathematics prizes at, whatever school. They may feel, oh, there's so much tribalism here, or there's corruption and whatever, that they feel like there's just so much oppression that they can't reach whatever their achievements can be. So when they go to a different place, now they just start, excelling. So sometimes it's very helpful, and I'm saying this specifically to those who are interested in repatriating. It may be a year or two before you start to realize how pathological your own physiological system has been trained to be, because you just think that all that abnormality is normal. And it's when you come to a place that's actually normal that you realize nobody's following you around in the store. I had a brother who I went to undergrad with who said, oh, he was in a store and nobody was following him around. And he said, wow, this is what it must feel like to be a white person in America. Because he's just shopping. Nobody's going to follow him because he's black. And I hate to say because he's black, because they're not doing it because he's black. They're doing it because they're quote unquote white and that's how they are. Right? If you think they're doing it because you're black, then you're going to start bleaching your skin, because now the cure is, now I'm just not going to be black. I'm going to do a nose job. I'm going to perm my. No, the problem isn't that you're black. The problem is that they think that they are quote unquote white, when really they're just the enemies of black people.
Ghana has long struggled with brain drain, yet today we're witnessing what some call brain gain. Why are so many Black people returning to Ghana to contribute their skills? What specific opportunities are attracting returnees now compared to previous decades?
So, just in terms of why there's a brain gain, over the decades, people have talked about the brain drain. What we're doing now is an initiative that, and when I say we, I'm referring to repatriatetogana.com, that we were endorsed, as I mentioned in another segment, by the Office of the President. Shout out to KOD representing Diaspora Affairs, Office of the President. But, basically, we saw that there are a lot of people who are, going out. I've seen stats like there are more Ghanaian doctors outside of Ghana than inside of Ghana. You'll get all these types of stats. Sometimes you'll hear the radio about a woman who tried to go to Italy, cross the Sahara Desert. I remember a couple of years ago, it was around the time where it came out that in Libya, Black people were being kidnapped and enslaved and so forth. And she was narrating her story in Chi about, when she got to a certain place in the desert, along with the others who were traveling with her, that the Arabs pulled them out and then started raping them. And any of the boys who resisted rape, they just shot them in the head and then dumped them in a mass grave. And she said that she was raped so many times that she couldn't even remember how many times before she eventually got to the shore, before she crossed. And then when she got to Italy, she was supposed to work off her quote unquote debt as, guess what, a prostitute. So like, look at, this type of thing where Black people are leaving the land of Black people. Meanwhile, all of these non-Black people are coming here. So a couple of months ago, I did a panel where all of the students were like, oh, I'm trying to leave Ghana, right? These are Ghanaian students. All of them are trying to leave Ghana. And then you have those of us who are coming from the diaspora who are coming here and we see opportunity and so forth. But really, everybody sees opportunity. Like there are Lebanese who are doing these farms over here. not too far from even where I live. You have the Chinese who are here, who are building yet another China mall. Like there's one here, now another one here, now another one here. Now they got another one called Panda this and so forth. Like everybody is here and sees opportunity, and they see the opportunity because they know that Black people don't practice race first. Any other people will say, they'll practice functional hatred. They will say, I don't care what looks nice, I care what's mine. So the Chinese say, I'm only buying from Chinese people. Nobody has the disease where, like, oh, let me go and only support Black people. Like, they don't have that. So they know that there's opportunity here, but we're not even trained that way. We'll go to, college, we'll go to university and so forth, and we'll see, oh, how can I get a job? And if I can't get a job, oh, well, there's nothing. There's a unemployed graduate association, all these types of things. It's really telling you that what you've gotten is miseducation if you haven't learned how to solve your own problems, and that in solving your own problems, that's how you're going to be able to feed yourself and feed your children and so forth and so on. But this is what you have with the brain drain side. Now the brain gain are those of us, Black people, who are seeing that when we come here, like I said, it's like being from Addis Ababa and then you come to sea level and you see, now I'm not worried about, oh, I can't get this promotion because this quote unquote white person is going to act like a quote unquote white person, or I can't even drive through this neighborhood. And I'm telling you, these are thoughts that Black people think every single day, and they think it's normal for them to think those thoughts. They're like, I can't drive through this neighborhood because if I drive, and like Bensonhurst was like this, I remember growing up, where you actually had Black people who were assaulted, pulled out of cars, all these different types of areas. Ahmaud Arbery, like literally jogging. If you jog in this neighborhood, you can get shot and killed. If you drive through that neighborhood, you can be pulled out of your car and you can be, attacked. They have what they used to call sundown towns. It's still like that, where after sundown, if you're Black, you better not be caught in that area. Otherwise, you're not going to be seen anymore. I remember James Byrd just walking down the street. These quote unquote white guys got out of a pickup truck, grabbed them, put a noose around his neck, and then they dragged him all the way down so that all along the highway, parts of his body were there. His leg was there, his arm was there, clothes were there, his head popped off and then rolled away. Like, as a Black person, and anybody who says otherwise is lying to you, right? They're talking about how great it is to live in the US and oh, the internet is full. You, as a Black person, at any point in time, whether you're a senator, whether you are a whatever, I don't care what your position is, CEO or whatever company, that when this police officer comes, if they don't recognize that you're whoever you think you are, that can be it for you. You can be Sandra Bland, right? You can be, I can just go down the list. So that's that. Now the brain gain is part of what you see with Trump, because part is a push factor, another one is a pull factor. So the push factor is literally Trump taking jobs away from Black women. And I've heard stats, somewhere along the lines of 300,000 Black women have been removed from government jobs because they said, we just don't want you here, and you can't do anything about it, right? So now some of them are contacting me through Repatriate to Ghana, and they're saying, I want to see what the opportunities are here in Ghana. There's a sister who is doing an electric, bicycle service in Burkina Faso, where everybody has a electric, moto, as they call it, right? Okada, as they call it here in Nigeria. But I was like, this is an amazing business. Now imagine if she was just stuck in, well, I got to do what I got to do to pay the bills. I got to work for this white guy and blah, 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 blah. And if he assaults me or does this, I just got to put up with it because I got to pay my bills. I got to feed my children. Here's somebody who has a grander vision of what life can be. She can be in the land of President Ibrahim Traore. And she said, yeah, I just sold some of my bikes. I saw her in August when I went, and then I just saw her again. She was like, yeah, I just sold some of my electric, bicycles. I was like, this is great, right? So, again, here are people who are contributing to the brain gain. Through Decade of Our Repatriation, we have a brother who has the Beyond Investments. Now, this brother is building, condos and all these things at Obosamase, a brother named Dre Taylor. Amazing work that he's doing. There's another brother, Calvin Daniels, who has a moringa farm. I was interviewed on another channel. He was interviewed right after me, and it just blew up because people were hearing I could become a multi-millionaire just off of growing moringa. So now everybody and their mother wants to start growing moringa. And he was saying, yo, it's like people here just don't want money, because he said the slime from snails, people here will, eat what they call in French escargot. I guess it sounds whatever. But people will put snails in there for food and soup and whatever. But he's like, the dried slime for snails is something, I think it was something like $80,000 per kilo, right? something just astronomical. I may not even have the figures right anymore. Some months back, he told me, but I'm like, there are things around you. He said the inside of plantain that you'll cut down the plantain, and the inside of the stalk that's left. He said this is also money. It can be produced. Some people are using it, to make cloth and so forth and so on. So you have all these things that literally you're surrounded by opportunity. But if you haven't gone to school or been trained to see it as opportunity, the waste products. I saw a sister in Kenya who was taking like the plastic bags, polythene as they call it here, the rubber that they call it here, and she was integrating it into a block in order to make, um, you know, a stronger brick where you can slam it to the ground. It's not going to break apart like sandcrete. It's going to be even stronger. They're doing something similar here in Ghana. But you have people who are Ghanaians who are seeing opportunities, and then you also have those who have come from outside who are also seeing similar opportunities. And that's where you get the brain gain, that rather than working for our past, current, and future enemies, we're saying, you know what, we can work for ourselves. This agricultural project that I could have been using to finance Trump, I can now use that to finance Ibrahim Traore. That building project that I could have been using to finance whoever, Kier, whatever the guy's name is, I can now use this to finance President Mahama and the good works that are going on with the Big Push initiative and this initiative, that initiative. You see what I'm saying? So this is really where you start to see, the brain gain. And, there are different things that can be done. Every so often, you'll see like a video online of a person complaining that, oh, I came to Ghana and I got scammed, or I came here. And I'm like, really what you're saying is you didn't come through Repatriate to Ghana. All your complaints are really another way of saying, I didn't find out how to do it from one who already knows. There's an expression where they say, if your brother is on the mango tree, you need not die of starvation. So someone who has already gone here before, and you see all these people do it. If you go to DC, DC is like little Ethiopia, because the first people from Ethiopia came there, and then they called their cousins, they called their relatives and their brothers. They got into this parking, thing. Those in DC know what I'm talking about. That the Ethiopians own all these multi-level car parks and so forth and so on. They started working there. They were like, this is great. We're going to own all of these, right? In New York is a little Senegal. What did they do? The first Senegalese came. They started calling the other Senegalese and Gambians and so forth. And now there's so many Senegalese there, you don't even know what to do. North Carolina is like that with Congo. I didn't even know that. There's so many people, Congolese. Now imagine if you went through Repatriate to Ghana. I'm a pretty successful repatriate, right? Not to toot my own horn, but you know, multi-award winning professor, installed traditional ruler, so forth and so on. Then I'm pretty successful. You would think that you would go to someone who has done it successfully, but some people are like, oh, I want to figure it out myself. Now, even within the US, let's say somebody moves from the south of the US to New York, right? I just came from the backwaters of Mississippi, Alabama, and so forth, and then I go among all these city slickers in New York. You're gonna get had, right? And they're gonna say, this guy doesn't even know what street he's on. He doesn't know, what this is. Oh, just hold this for me and go take it over there. Next thing you know, you were running drugs. You don't even know what you're into. Like, this is in the same country that type of thing will happen. Imagine, and it's not to say everybody in Ghana is going to be a villain or so forth, but you could have some people who need money, and they're going to see this person doesn't know the language, they don't know the culture. This person is going to be an easy, whatever. Now, the way to protect yourself from that is somebody who has actually been here, lived here, and been successful here. And now we can help you. I had a case where one brother, he said he had a budget of 17,500 to purchase a vehicle. We got him a vehicle, a truck. He needed a 4x4 for 12,300. We literally saved him $5,000 plus, and he used that money in order to buy a plane ticket for himself and his fiance. Now he's living happily here in Ghana. Now, what's that worth to you? One is that if you just send it to any random person that you found on, I don't even know what white website, if you tell them that your budget is 17,500, they may find that same truck for 12,300, but they'll tell you, oh, it's 17,500. Send it over, and then they'll just chop the difference. What we did is we told him, no, here's the receipt. This is the difference. That difference is staying with you, and you're able to use that to actually buy the plane ticket here. So again, through Repatriate to Ghana, through Decade of Our Repatriation, the reason that we got endorsed by the Office of the President is that they've seen the testimonials. They know all of those literally hundreds of people who, because of us, that have been able to get citizenship. They know all of those who have been able to smooth their transition in various ways, whether that's by learning the language, which I teach at the University of Ghana. I started off in 1998. Now I teach Ghanaians the Tree language. Surprise, surprise. Who better to help you, get into the society and be part of the brain gain and to live here permanently than someone. I came here 17 years ago. I haven't set foot on US soil ever since. There are people who go back to drive Uber and come back because they didn't come with a plan. There are people who go back to, do odd jobs, bag groceries at Walmart, whatever they're doing, because they didn't know how to do it. I know how to do it. I know how to finish your PhD. I know how to win multiple awards for academics and scholarship. I know how to start a capoeira group here. I know how to have land here and build a house here because I've done it. But again, you have people who are hard headed and they're like, oh, I want to figure it out myself. I'm going to save myself money. And I'm like, what you're doing, there's an expression, you don't want to be penny smart and pound foolish. This means that you're saving on something that's just a little bit, but now you just put $100,000. Somebody was just telling me that he had a friend who invested $500,000, $500,000, and it's up in smoke. They have no idea what happened to it. They're calling, the calls aren't being answered. We, through Repatriate to Ghana, we're like a bulletproof vest for you because I had a situation with a client who wanted an acre of land. He got 4 plots of land, and the one who was selling it was shorting him. He was selling him 4 plots of 100 by 70, and it didn't amount to a full acre, which should be 100 by 100, 4 of them. That's just short of an acre. But he had gotten shorted by the one who was selling. Now, because I facilitated the deal, what I did is I took, at that time, 10,000 Ghana cedis was even more than it is now. I think it was like 5 to 1 at that time. I used 10,000 cedis of my own money in order to balance him of the difference because there was no more land around, so they couldn't add land to it. It was just like what you got is what you got, but you paid for an acre, but you didn't get a full acre. So my own money, I'm paying him, and I didn't even tell him that this is I just said, this is your straight now, right? This is what you paid. You got that difference back, and this is, what you're doing. This is something that somebody with integrity is going to do, right? But not everybody's going to have that integrity. You just find somebody named whatever Kofi on whatever website, and imagine that same thing happens where, oh, you got shorted. They're gonna be like, you just short. Now, for me, I don't need people's money. Like, I'm a professor at the university. We just got our, well, let me not say what we just got, but those in Utah know what we just got. So it's like we're not hard up for cash. There are some people in society who don't have 9 to 5 jobs. They're hard up for cash, and if they can't earn it the easy way, they're gonna try it the hard way, or vice versa, whichever one you consider to be easy or hard, right? And again, it's not to say everybody is a scam artist in Ghana, but if you don't know who's who, if you don't have vetted people, and for me, if I refer you to a lawyer, it's a lawyer who I found out just with the UN General Assembly. I found that my lawyer, who I've known for 12 years, who's helped me on, through thick and thin, was on that same delegation with President Muhammad. So my lawyer is also at least one of the president's lawyers. I was like, that's pretty good, right? The people who I know at the Registrar General, I didn't know those people when I was here for 5 years. I didn't know those people when I was here for 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years. These are people who I met, and I sifted through the ones who were not good. I had to call the cops on one guy at the Registrar General after he had my documents for 6 months. I said, I'm going to call the police on you before I got my documents and I got my money back. And it's rare for you to get your money back, right? Anybody in Ghana can say that to you. So it's like, imagine you just came sight unseen and you don't know the person at the Registrar General who is going to be on the up and up. I know the person in that office who is honest, who is going to do everything. He's not going to ask for, whatever, kalabule, whatever. He's just honest and he's going to do it. And it took me a couple of years to find that guy. There's somebody at DVLA who is able to do the turnaround time for the driver's license like that, not through any side, whatever, but I just know the one who, because this is one thing that people don't realize is that sometimes you can pay for something, you paid them in full, you did everything perfectly, they didn't give you your documents back, and they'll never give you your document. I'm like, why would you even do that? You got the money, just give them the thing back. They're not going to do it for whatever reason. But I know the ones who are going to get you your documents back. Why? Because they know if not, then Obenfo Kambon isn't referring anyone else to them. And now school fees time runs around, they start thinking, I wish I had a client from, Obenfo Kambon right now. So again, it's in every area from immigration, those who are looking for visa, land, so forth. I've dealt with a mason who was a horrible mason. I've dealt with a carpenter who was a horrible carpenter. Now, my speed dial consists of the mason who's a good mason, actually a great mason, who just did some work, the coping on the wall around my house. I know the carpenter who's a great carpenter who uses dinya wood, and it looks like the highest international world quality that you can imagine in the world. That's my carpenter. Now, if you want the hard road, then you come to Ghana and you be here for like 3, 4, 5 years before you find a good carpenter. You be here for 3, 4, 5 years before you find you a good plumber. You be here 3, 4, 5 years before you find a lawyer who's not going to charge you an arm. And the lawyer who I mentioned earlier, I think I met him through a mutual friend, and he was just helping me out so many times, just pro bono. I had an issue with landlord and agent. He just got on the phone. He was able to talk to them. He didn't charge me a peswa, right? One of the top lawyers in the entire country, right? Should I mention his name? I don't know if I should mention his name, but one of the top lawyers in the entire country. If I should, then you can put it on the screen. In the entire country, and he was doing this like for years. So many things I will refer him to, and then lo and behold, um, I said, you know what? He hasn't charged me formally for any of these things that he's helped me with, but I said I'm going to pull out. I think at that time it was either 5,000 CDs or something like that, and at that time 5,000 CDs was worth a lot more. So you should look at it in context. Even though even now it's not cheap, but I pulled out 5,000 CDs. I put it into an envelope, and I called him up, and his voice sounded different, and he was like, "Oh, something. I'm at Legon Hospital." I was like, "Why are you at Legon Hospital?" He was like, "He was just in a car accident." Just the night, I didn't know about any of this. I had money for him just to sort him out because he's been so helpful to me over the years. He didn't ask me for it. He probably never would have asked me for it, but I just happened to have this envelope that I decided I'm going to do this for him because of all the help he's done. Now I got to the Legon, hospital, the new one, and he was there, at the intake ward on the right hand side, and he looked fine, right? He showed me a picture of his vehicle. You would never think anyone survived that crash. It looked so mangled that you would have thought they would have had to take a chainsaw to even open it up. Like, how did he even get out of it? He just had like a scratch here, and he was like, "I'm about to be a pastor." I was like, "Well, you do what you want." But he couldn't believe that he survived it, was basically the point. And I just so happened, I'm bringing this up because of like the mutual brain gain benefits to those who are here and those who are coming when there's that level of relationship. Now, he needed to sort out his hospital bill. I didn't know that, but I had money for him already. And I said, "Oh, I just have this for you because of all the help you've done." His wife was there. She thanked me profusely. He thanked me, and we have been on great terms before and then ever since. And now I know that he's I already knew he was one of the top lawyers in the country. I referred him to my sister. My sister had a court issue that she had to deal with. She was like, watching him work was like watching these TV lawyer shows. Like the way he showed that the other side was lying and blah, 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 blah. So you will have challenges, but those who are like, oh, Ghanaians or continental Africans are bad and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, whatever issue you have with Ghanaians, it's going to be a Ghanaian who's going to help you. Any issue you have with somebody who's trying to scam you, it's going to be a Ghanaian who's going to get you out of there. I had a situation, actually a couple of situations, where I just so happened to know from Chicago the nephew of the president of Ghana. I won't tell you which president it was and what time frame, but I had a good friend, a brother of mine, who happened to be the nephew of the president of Ghana, where I had to call in what I call the airstrike. Right? I said, "This is the issue." He called his uncle. His uncle was able to resolve the issue. So anything, people who try to blanket, and the reason why they blanket is because they want to, is because the algorithm tells them that. It'll show them the video of someone from the continent who's saying talking out the side of the neck, saying crazy stuff. And then they'll show people on the continent, somebody from the diaspora who's talking crazy and so forth. And those who own the platform are laughing at both of them because they say, "This is good algorithm. My stock is going through the roof because black people are arguing with black people. Meanwhile, we kidnapped all of y'all. We enslaved all of y'all. We colonized all of y'all. Ha 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 ha. The more you fight, the more we laugh. Bloods versus Crips. Hutus versus Tutsis, right? Liberia, diaspora versus native. It's the same thing. Wash, rinse, and repeat that they do over and over again because they benefit off of the conflict that we have internally. But again, because we have Repatriate to Ghana, We know those Ghanaians who are going to fight for you. And as diasporans, we're going to fight for you and make sure that everything is resolved for you and that you're going to have a successful repatriation.
Can you explain the historical importance of the door of no return and how it's transformed into the modern door of return? What does the symbolic shift mean for the African diaspora today?
So it's interesting you asked me about the door of no return because, as I mentioned in another segment, we have an initiative that's called DOOR, and it's referring to that door, but it's called Decade of Our Repatriation, DOOR. This is an initiative that has, like I mentioned, been endorsed by the Office of the President, been endorsed by Ghana Tourism Development Company. We have an MOU with the UNIA, that's the Universal Negro Improvement Association, Nana Marcus Garvey's organization, for anyone who has heard of Nana Marcus Garvey, that this is a symbolic door, right? Let's look at Ghana. People say Ghana is the gateway, Ghana is the door. So let's say after you want to move anywhere else, that Ghana is that soft landing. One, people speak the same language that people are used to, at least in places like the US and Canada and UK and so forth. It's a bit of an easier fit for people who are coming. Now, with this decade of our repatriation, what has happened is that the presidency has said that when you have repatriates themselves who know the process, you see. So I've been through the process of repatriation. I know what the pitfalls are, not only for myself, but I've seen people who came here, they stayed here for 5 years, they went back and they haven't been back since. I know people who came here, been here for 10 years, they went back to the US, they've never been back since. I know people who, came and went and came and went, came and went. When they went, they weren't able to come back again. Maybe they'll come back in the future. There's a proverb in Yoruba. They say, "Eni to jin si koto, ko ara yoku logbon." I'll come again. "Eni to jin si koto, ko ara yoku logbon." That someone who falls into a pit teaches everyone around wisdom. In other words, wise people learn from the mistakes of others. Excuse me to say, fools learn from their own mistakes. So, for myself, and I've made mistakes. This is not to say, whatever, but anybody is going to make some mistakes, but you shouldn't have to make those exact same mistakes that I made. Imagine if every single diasporan came here and fell into a pit. That's not a good look. There should be someone standing there who's like, yo, it's dark around, but guess what? Right here, just walk around. Just walk around. I can say, trust me. I can say, here's a flashlight. See, oh, wow, now I see what's going on. But, this is what, it is. Now, to come back to the door of no return, you found this in Gore, where I've been to Gore. You found this in Anomansa, which is the original word for what they now call Elmina, right? Others call it Edina, but it was originally called Anomansa, which translates to when you wouldn't know what. Science, and Sanda is referring to the Kakum River that flows there. But it's saying that, when you get there, there's copious water. They have at that dungeon that is now known as Elmina, they have a door of no return, as they called it. If you go to Oga, that's what others refer to as Cape Coast, they have a door of no return there. And this is, basically the non-Black enemies who built those dungeons saying that you'll never be able to come back here. What happens when we come back here is, excuse me to say, it's a big slap in the face. Let me not excuse myself because I was going to say something that I need an excuse for. I don't need an excuse for it. This is a slap in the face to all of those who said that you wouldn't be able to return, because every single kidnapped Black person and every single person on the continent, all of them were kidnapped. Nobody went voluntarily. Nobody went, oh, let me go walk on the ship voluntarily. Let me be taken away from my mother voluntarily, my wife voluntarily, my sister voluntarily. What the non-Blacks try to do now is they try to say, oh, sold, hey, y'all were sold and blah, blah, blah. Every person was kidnapped. The question is, were you kidnapped by the non-Blacks or were you kidnapped by Blacks, right? Now, how did you even get to be kidnapped by Blacks in the first place? There's a good book by Professor Nafafe that goes into Lorenzo da Silva Mendoza and his court case that he lodged at the Vatican. This is a traditional ruler. He lodged a court case to abolish enslavement altogether. As many of y'all want to say, oh, continentals are against that. No, here is a quote unquote continental person who is going to lodge a case at the Vatican for them to abolish enslavement altogether. What he got out of it was that they brought back some who had been kidnapped from Brazil and brought them back to, Luanda and what's now modern day Angola. But he wasn't fighting for just them. He was fighting for the end of enslavement altogether. Now, when you look at this, each and every person, as I mentioned, was kidnapped starting in 1441. That's when you had Antal Gonzalez, who you can read his a quote from him where he said, "Wouldn't it be a good idea that rather than get such a petty merchandise," and he was referring to Prince Henry the Navigator, who had sent him out for oil and seal skins and stuff like that. He said, "Wouldn't it be good to bring the first captives before the face of our prince?" I'm telling you exactly what he said. From there, everything that you know as transatlantic enslavement came from that decision. Just a random whimsical thought of this non-black person in 1441 has impacted the lives of hundreds of millions of black people up to this day, right? After Antal Gonzalez in 1441, and for those who are keeping track, that's before 1619, you had 1444, you had Lancelot de Freitas, you had all of these others who came immediately after in order to augment that, where the first one they took a black man and a black woman. After that, they took, 44 additional ones. After that, it took several hundred. That's how it got started, was literally non-black people kidnapping black people from the continent. Now, later on, and this is what's documented in the book that I just mentioned about Mendoza and the court case that he brought, was that up until that time, all they were doing was kidnapping black people. They would use pretense. They would say, "Oh, because you didn't fulfill this obligation, we're kidnapping your people." You had traditional rulers who themselves were kidnapped. But he came up with a decree, and the decree said that all of the things that you used to bring in tribute, now you can find all the way back to classical Kemet people who are bringing tribute. They'll bring fruits, they'll bring vegetables, they'll bring, cattle, they'll bring whatever. Anyone who is, the ruler over your ruler, you bring them a tribute, usually yearly at a harvest festival. What this guy said is that we're no longer taking tribute in palm oil because there are some places that don't have palm. He gives a rationale. He says we're no longer taking it in chickens because by the time they get to where we are on the coast, most of those chickens have died. So he lists and basically why they shouldn't take tributes of all the things that had up to that point been brought as tribute. He said from this day forward, you have to bring tribute in human beings, right? So how you got from a place where they're only kidnapping people to now they're turning black people against other black people by saying, if you don't kidnap your neighbor, we're kidnapping you. And that's literally exactly what they did. The case that I mentioned of those people who got brought back from Brazil was because he had kidnapped them under false pretenses of saying, oh, if you don't bring them back within whatever short time frame, 48 hours, 1,000 people, then we're kidnapping. It was a pretense because they know we got cannons, we got guns, and now we're kidnapping everyone because you couldn't fulfill my decree. We're kidnapping every single person from your society and we're kidnapping you too. So the rulers themselves ended up on the ships going to Brazil. All of this is, historically documented. You can actually find this out. And again, this is Professor Nafafe's book that goes into all of this as well. So just saying all of that to say that when you're looking at the door of no return, how did you even get to that door of no return? It was through kidnapping each and every last person. Nobody volunteered. Every person was kidnapped. Now, after they were kidnapped, now it comes up, well, was there a transaction involved after the kidnapping? When did the like all of those things are subsequent to the kidnapping happening. But that's what they were saying is that you'll never be able to come back. And each and every last person who was in that boat, every last one wanted to go back and see their mother. They wanted to see their sister. They wanted to see their brother. They wanted to go home. If you read a book called Barracoon, there's Nana Cujo Lewis. And what he says is he just wants to go back and see his mama. He was kidnapped as a small child because those in Dahomey had kidnapped those who are Yoruba, because what they didn't realize is that the Berlin Conference is coming and they're colonizing everybody. You thought that that was your trading partner. You thought that was your buddy. Guess what? All of y'all are getting mowed down by machine guns. All of y'all are getting blasted away by cannons because they see all of y'all are saying, whether you call yourself Dahomey, whether you call yourself Oyo, whether you call yourself Asante, they're killing everybody, right? They're taking everybody's land. You think you're different. They say, no, y'all are all the same. So he was getting kidnapped by those who are the puppets, right? So again, if you look at a marionneteer and a marionette, this is the type of puppet that has strings, right? You can get mad at the puppet, but really the ones who's pulling the strings, that's where the expression comes from, is the one who originated it in the first place back in 1444. And after that, you have the papal bull of Pope Nicholas, who said that all Christians are to reduce to perpetual slavery all of these black people, talking about the pagans, the Saracens, infidels, and so forth. He's talking about you as black people, and that's exactly what he's doing. So again, just to come back, the door of no return, it represents their idea that you should never, or you never ever will be able to return. In Benin, they'd have them walk around this monument of forgetfulness and so forth, and then you go out, you're not supposed to remember where you came from, right? But when we come home, this is a slap in the face to the kidnappers, to the black kidnappers who were the puppets, and it's an especially bigger slap in the face to the non-black kidnappers who started the enslavement process in the first place. And anybody who wants to say, oh, it's all the same, whether it's black or non-black, well, I ask you, how many black shipping companies do you know during the entire 1441 all the way up to today? How many ships were owned by any black people? I'm waiting. How many plantations in Cuba, Hispaniola, right, Brazil, how many plantations were owned by black people? How many insurance companies, right? They talk about the Zong, fiasco. How many insurance companies were owned by black people? How many shipbuilding companies were owned by black people? Right? The position then is the exact same position we're in now, as we provide raw materials, whether it's cocoa, whether it's gold. We're not in charge of any of it. We just give the raw materials, and then they do as they see fit, because there's a power differential. And anybody who doesn't recognize there's a power differential is dishonest and they're lying. The power differential is that the reason why they're able to make sure that all you can do is raw cocoa is because if you don't, we're going to Kwame Nkrumah you. The way that they're able to make sure that all you get is the raw gold exported is if you don't, then they'll Thomas Sankara you. If you don't give them just the raw coltan and uranium and plutonium and whatever, bauxite, then they'll Patrice Lumumba you. That's the power differential. And anybody back then who fought against them ended up either on the ship or ended up dead. But even in the face of knowing that, you still had those who fought tooth and nail against them. You understand? So again, the door of no return, historically, it means that they're saying you will never come back. And when you come back, you're slapping in the face the puppet and the puppeteer. You're slapping the marionette and the marionetteer. And those who want to do this broad stroke, they say, oh, all continental Africans sold all diasporans. Well, when I read Barracoon, Nana Kujo Lewis, his mother didn't sell him. His mother wanted him to come back, and he wanted to go back to his mother. It was those who were outside of his community who thought that they were something different. And lo and behold, aren't we doing the same thing now? Diasporans think they're different from continentals. Continentals think they're different from diaspora. What's really the fundamental difference between what got us into that situation back then and the situation we're in right now? We thought we were different when really our enemy said, all of y'all look the same to me. You understand? And they were willing to do and reduce to perpetual enslavement, as the Pope taught them to do. Pope Nicholas taught them to do in the Papal Bull Dum Diversus and Romanus Pontifex. He literally said to reduce all of you to perpetual slavery. That was as groundbreaking of an idea as like going from a yam phone, so-called, to an iPhone. I don't like the term yam phone because yam is good and delicious and helpful for you. But like, this is like, this hadn't even been something that not only you are perpetually enslaved, but your children's children forever into perpetuity are forever enslaved. That is the idea. That didn't come from the Asante Hene. That didn't come from the ruler of Dahomey. That didn't come from the Oni of Ife. That didn't come from any black person. The idea of the original enslavement that came from 1441 that I mentioned, Antão Gonçalves, the Silva in Luanda, that idea as well, to say, how can we get them to do all of the heavy lifting? Because they're like, yo, we're tired. We're kidnapping everybody. How do we get them to do all the heavy lifting? We'll use the power differential that if you don't do it, we're kidnapping you. And that's exactly what they did. Even if you do it, we're kidnapping you too, right? And you found that in Old Calabar versus New Calabar, where they said, oh, just come onto the ship. Don't worry, just come onto the ship. When they came onto the ship, they put everybody in leg irons. Those who thought that they were salesmen, those who thought that those were my trading partners, guess what? All of them ended up getting shipped away. and they had to write affidavits of this is, what happened to me, so forth and so on. This is how we got captured. They said we should come on board for a feast and drinks. As soon as we got there, they pulled out guns. And guess what? Those trading partners ended up right over on the other side of the Atlantic. So, these are things to keep in mind. So you mentioned, I'm going to pause here. You're going to have to edit that because you were talking about historical context and what else? Okay. So what they're now calling the door of return, we're not calling it return. Return is too vague. When you say year of return, it just, for a lot of people, it just meant come party for a week or two, go back and get a knee on your neck. Come here, shake your booty. I don't have a problem with, people having fun. So have your fun. But, as Honorable Minister Okudzeto Blackness said, there's nothing dirty about December. If you want to have fun, fun, but you should also have serious things to do. That's why we have the Abibitumi Film Festival that's happening November 28th through 30th at our Yarifa Mall and online in partnership with UNIMEC and the Africa World Documentary Film Festival, because you should be able to do empowering, Black powering things as you're coming to Ghana. That's the reason why we have the virtual conference from December 5th to the 7th. Anyone who's interested can go to abibitumi.com, abibitumi.com. That's the reason why we have the hybrid conference both on the ground at Equip and Mount Pointe online, so that you can actually get a sense of some of the serious work that's going on, where people are doing agriculture, people are doing construction, people are doing all the nuts and bolts of nation building. They're going demonstration over conversation. That's our theme for this year, what Black power is. Demonstration over conversation, or be about what you actually say that you're about. So this decade of our repatriation, this door is going from diaspora to destiny. This is opening the door, and that's what we can do. We can open the door for you, but ultimately it's up for you. It's up to you to actually decide to walk through. And when you walk through, what you're doing is that I'm showing you the possibilities for yourself, for your children, and for your children's children, that they don't have to go around a store worried about, are they going to get shot in the back because someone said they stole something. They don't have to worry about driving in their brand new luxury car and then they get pulled out and then they get their skull cracked open, because how can you afford that car? How can you afford this neighborhood? This is a thing that, is only being exacerbated under Trump. For anyone who hasn't read the Turner Diaries, you can read the Turner Diaries. This is what all these neo-Nazis and Aryans read. And what it is a novel, but it's put together like a diary of, this is the other side of before we exterminated the Black people, and this is how we were able to exterminate them. We did this. We assassinated this one. We, put a bomb in this one's car. At the end of the day, we were able to exterminate all the Black people and take control of the entire U.S. What you see happening in the US, all of those, the ones who are shooting up the church in South Carolina, all of those who are, in the Senate and whatever, they sound like, oh, this guy sounds racist. They're just following the playbook of the Turner Diaries. That's the Bible of all these so-called white supremacists. But we don't call them white supremacists because they're not supreme. They dominate by means of terror. But all of these white terrorists, so-called white terrorists, because they're not white either, that's what they're actually following. So it behooves you to look up a book called Black Empire, because that is the one that shows what it looks like on the other side of victory for Black people. So again, this decade of our repatriation, this is the door for you back to Ghana and the land of Black people. When you come back, you are slapping in the face those who thought that they were different from you because they called themselves Asante versus Ewe, or Y'all versus Dahome, or this versus that. All of that goes to the wayside, because ultimately what we have is a common enemy. If you see zebras fighting amongst each other, that's dinner for the lion. If you see antelope fighting amongst each other, that's dinner for the cheetah. When you see Black people fighting amongst each other, that's dinner for all of our non-Black enemies who've been raping, enslaving, killing, bringing death and destruction, raping, ravishing, pillage, and plunder to Black people from 5,000 years ago in classical Kemet all the way up to today. And the only remedy for it is Abibitumi, Black Power, Abibi Fahodie, Black Liberation, so that we can restore Ma'at and make Kemet, which means the land of Black people, and we can make Kemet Black again.